Resistance against the French 1945 to 1954 World War II ended. Because of the benefits of exploiting colonies globally, the imperialist colonial powers did not want an independent Vietnam. The U.S. Congress had no intention of opposing the restoration of French domination in Indochina. On August 17, 1945, the French Defense Committee decided to establish the French Expeditionary Force in the Far East. With the help of the British troops, on August 24, 1945, the French returned to Indochina, relying on the presence of British forces to invade south of the 16th parallel. Chiang Kai-shek's troops controlled northern Vietnam, maintaining and confirming French sovereignty in Indochina for the common interests of Britain and France in restoring colonies in Southeast Asia. By October 1945, the British Prime Minister and the French Prime Minister had signed a provisional agreement. France restored its government in Saigon with the recognition of the British government. On September 6, 1945, British troops entered Saigon. On September 12, British forces took over the headquarters of the Southern Vietnam People's Committee, released French prisoners, and equipped 1,500 French soldiers who had previously been detained by the Japanese. Additionally, the British demanded that the Vietnamese Revolutionary Armed Forces surrender their weapons. A week after the people of Hanoi rose up to seize power on August 19, 1945, a French general sent a telegram to Indochina, stating, "The motherland France sends her joy and gratitude to her sons in the Indochinese Federation. The sons of Indochina have proven themselves worthy of a larger and freer national entity. In view of their previous attitude toward the enemy and their loyalty to France, France declares her readiness to fulfill her commitments for the great benefit of all." In 1945, the French held a firm belief that they had the right and justification for their actions, and that Vietnam was theirs without question. They also believed that the Vietnamese were incapable of governing their own country and people, and thus needed French assistance. In the north, 200,000 Chinese nationalist troops entered northern Vietnam to disarm the Japanese forces from the 16th parallel northwards, according to the Allies' division of responsibilities. At the same time, nationalist political organizations opposed to both the French and the Viet Minh, such as the Viet Quoc and the Viet Cach, also crossed the Sino-Vietnamese border into Vietnam to establish control in several northern provinces. Chiang Kai-shek had ordered the execution of a plan for Vietnam known as the Chinese Army enters Vietnam and destroys communists, aimed at eliminating communists and capturing Ho Chi Minh. The purpose of the Chinese troops was to leverage the French to meet their economic and political demands in China and Indochina, thereby enabling the Chongqing government to focus on countering the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese troops demanded that the Provisional Government of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam report everything to them, including military situations, supply food, and synchronize with China's time zone. According to the Chinese nationalist forces, political parties like the Viet Quoc and Viet Cach continuously caused disruptions, demanding a share of political power within Vietnam. In these difficult circumstances, with internal and external enemies and rampant famine, the Provisional Government of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, led by President Ho Chi Minh, immediately implemented wise policies. In the first government meeting on the afternoon of September 2, 1945, 3 immediate tasks for the government were outlined: fighting famine, illiteracy, and foreign invaders. The national treasury was empty with more than 1.2 million Indochinese piastres, nearly half of which were tattered notes. Famine was ravaging the country, and over 2 million Vietnamese had died of starvation in 1944 to 1945. Despite this, On September 7, 1945, the government issued a decree abolishing the poll tax, one of the taxes of the feudal and colonial regime during the French period. The government promoted increasing production, practicing thrift, organizing a gold week, an independence fund, and calling for the support of patriotic entrepreneurs. President Ho Chi Minh launched the Save Rice to Save the Hungry movement and practiced it himself. Every 3 days, he skipped one meal, and every month, he skipped 10 meals, donating the saved rice to help the poor. To eradicate illiteracy, President Ho Chi Minh said, "An ignorant nation is a weak nation." The government launched the popular education movement. This movement developed strongly and vigorously, evolving into a patriotic movement with the slogan, "Going to school is patriotic." On the occasion of the first school year opening of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, President Ho Chi Minh sent a letter to students. He advised, "Will Vietnam's mountains and rivers become beautiful or not? Will the Vietnamese people step up to the glory to stand alongside the great powers of the 5 continents or not? It largely depends on the efforts of your studies." This served as a call for patriotism and hope for the future. The Vietnamese people had great trust in President Ho Chi Minh because, immediately after the declaration of independence, he began building a state based on progressive democratic principles. Alongside the People's Army, the People's Public Security Force was officially established. On August 19, 1945, and on September 13, 1945, the Provisional Government of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam issued a decree establishing military courts to try all those who acted against the independence of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, except for cases where the offenders were soldiers, which were handled by the military under military law. In the extremely difficult conditions of the early days of the revolution, the government of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam laid the foundation for a nascent judiciary with the goal of protecting the country's independence and the peaceful life of the people, resolutely punishing traitors who relied on external forces to sabotage the revolution. Regarding the Kuomintang Chinese Nationalist Party, the Communist Party of Vietnam implemented a friendly Sino-Vietnamese policy, making certain concessions to the Kuomintang forces, using their currency, supplying food and provisions, and avoiding conflicts with them to prevent falling into their provocations and coup attempts. Politically, Vietnam agreed to expand the provisional government into a provisional coalition government, accepting several representatives from the Vietnamese Nationalist Party, Viet Quoc, and the Vietnamese Revolutionary League Viet Cach to participate in the government. Regarding the French forces, the party and government of Vietnam decided to temporarily negotiate with France. They agreed to allow French troops to move into the north, to avoid a situation of fighting multiple enemies at once, to preserve strength, and to gain time to consolidate the revolutionary government and strengthen capabilities. This strategy also aimed to quickly remove the Kuomintang forces from Vietnam and eliminate their collaborators, the Vietnamese Nationalist Party and the Vietnamese Revolutionary League. On September 24, 1945, the Ministry of Finance of Vietnam issued Decree No. 1 TC regarding the minting and printing of currency under national authority. On November 15, 1945, the printing office under the Ministry of Finance was established. The introduction of the national currency was a crucial and prudent step for the young government and financial sector of Vietnam at that time. It helped address financial difficulties and served as a tool in the struggle against the French Indochinese piastre, while asserting to the world that Vietnam was an independent nation with its own independent financial system and currency that no external force could change. On September 23, 1945, with the assistance of British colonial troops, French forces occupied and attacked the headquarters of the People's Committee of Southern Vietnam and the command office in Saigon, marking the beginning of the Second Indochina War. The resistance took place in the southern and central regions of Vietnam. Despite the small and weak armed forces of Vietnam at that time, there were movements advancing from the north and central regions, and overseas Vietnamese from Laos, Cambodia, and Thailand came together to gradually halt the French forces, bankrupting the quick victory strategy of the French colonialists. However, at this stage, the Democratic Republic of Vietnam was still young and faced numerous difficulties and challenges, making it unable to engage in a large-scale war. President Ho Chi Minh and the Communist Party of Vietnam advocated for postponement and compromise, striving to resolve the Franco-Vietnamese issues through peaceful means, aiming to buy time to prepare their forces. The preliminary agreement on March 6, 1946, and the Provisional Vietnam-France Agreement on September 15, 1946, were signed, temporarily pushing the war back. However, shortly afterward, the British did not abandon their invasion intentions, and the French colonialists increasingly encroached, demanding that the Vietnamese military lay down their arms and surrender. Seeing that postponement was no longer possible, Ho Chi Minh called on the entire nation with the spirit of, to spare all sacrifices, but not to lose the country, and definitely not to become slaves, on the night of December 19, 1946. Following the call of President Ho Chi Minh and the Central Committee of the party, the entire Vietnamese population rose up in resistance. The nationwide resistance began with the clear strategy of the Communist Party of Vietnam, a total, all-encompassing, long-term war relying primarily on its own strength. One paragraph in Ho Chi Minh's call for national resistance: "The hour of national salvation has come. Those who have guns will use guns. Those who have swords will use swords. Those who do not have swords will use spears, sticks, batons. Everyone must strive to fight against colonialism, to save the country, military and militia. The opportunity to save the country has come. We must sacrifice to the last drop of blood to protect the country. Although we have to fight a difficult resistance, with the determination to sacrifice, victory will certainly belong to our people." On December 19, 1946, to preserve the strength of the Vietnamese government, a decision was made to leave Hanoi and withdraw to the mountainous forests of North Vietnam to establish a new command base there. Within just 3 months, over 40,000 tons of military equipment and machinery from various departments were secretly moved to North Vietnam. The terrain here was secure and strategically suitable for covert operations. In the autumn of 1947, France concentrated an additional 20,000 troops to launch a large-scale offensive from multiple directions to surround and destroy the Viet Bac stronghold, the main military and leadership center of Vietnam's resistance movement. On October 7, 1947, the French offensive on Viet Bac began along 4 main axes: Route 3, Route 4, and from the El River and Siem River, forming a siege around Viet Bac. They also airdropped troops into towns like Bckn, Chmy, and Chen. Vietnam had anticipated and adjusted its combat strategy in advance. They deployed 10 regiments and 7 battalions of regular troops alongside local guerrilla forces. Vietnamese forces conducted continuous ambushes and hit and run attacks on French positions, causing significant losses and forcing the French to withdraw from the northern region. On November 22, 1947, France began its withdrawal from Viet Bac. During the retreat, they suffered heavy losses from Vietnamese counterattacks. By December 22, 1947, the Viet Bac campaign ended in a strategic victory for the Vietnamese forces. They defeated the large-scale French offensive and disrupted the French strategy of quick victory. Moreover, they ensured the safety of the leadership and shifted the military initiative into a new phase. In 1950, alongside local forces, the Viet Minh established 2 main divisions, the 308th and 304th, and 2 strong regiments, the 174th and 209th, as mobile units. During the 5-year resistance against the French in a situation of isolation, the Viet Minh actively expanded international relations to seek support. On October 1, 1949, the People's Republic of China was established and quickly recognized and established diplomatic relations with the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. Then, on January 18, 1950, the Soviet Union and Eastern European countries recognized and established diplomatic relations with the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. The credibility and military strength of the Viet Minh increased their influence among the people. During those same 5 years, the Viet Minh also utilized Vietnamese diaspora organizations in France to engage in political struggles, significantly influencing the anti-Indochina War movement against the French colonial rule. France plunged into an unprecedented political crisis. The Vietnam nationalist government established by France as its puppet proved too weak to effectively support the French administration in Indochina. The French government was forced to consider accepting economic and military aid from the United States to continue the war effort. However, after 5 years of war, the French forces in Indochina became increasingly bogged down in defensive positions. Despite efforts to build up local forces, their quality and combat spirit were low, making it nearly impossible for them to fulfill military tasks in place of the French troops. Vietnam's guerrilla warfare intensified in the enemy's rear areas, spanning from north-central to South Vietnam. From June 1950, the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Vietnam decided to launch a border campaign to break the isolation of the Viet Bac base and to open the Vietnam-China border to secure and expand support from socialist countries, strengthening the Viet Bac base. On September 16, 1950, Vietnamese forces opened fire to attack Dong Qui, Lang Son province, marking the beginning of the border campaign. They subsequently seized French strongholds. By September 17th, the situation in Dong Qui became very difficult for the French. Their defensive systems were divided, and by September 18th, Dong Qui fortress fell completely, despite air support from the French. French forces suffered heavy losses. On September 16th, in Saigon, a top-secret Special Order No. 46 from General Carpentier was sent to the commander in Hanoi. The retreat of French troops was announced. However, Vietnam had already anticipated and ambushed these retreat routes. On October 14, 1953, the border campaign concluded. Vietnam successfully eliminated over 8,000 enemy troops, captured and secured numerous pieces of weaponry, and liberated a large border region stretching from Cao Bang to Dien Lap, Lang Son. This expanded international engagement altered the course of the war, allowing Vietnam to gain the initiative strategically on the battlefield. Following their defeat in the border campaign, French colonial forces attempted to regain the strategic initiative by replacing their top general, considered the most capable in France at that time, and sending him to Vietnam. Vietnam defined its strategy to economically encircle and psychologically wage war on the resistance bases. The overarching goal was to maintain the initiative, continually launch offensives to weaken enemy forces, and progress towards liberating the Red River Delta. Vietnamese forces established numerous large-scale campaigns across the country, exhausting and significantly impacting French morale. Simultaneously, Vietnam intensified guerrilla warfare in French rear areas. These military activities inflicted considerable damage on France. French plans collapsed, and the High Commissioner-cum-Commander-in-Chief of French forces in Indochina was recalled home. In May 1953, General Henry Navarre was appointed as the overall commander of the French military forces. General Navarre formulated a new military plan known as the Navarre Plan, aiming for a strategic military victory within 18 months to salvage France's honor. Understanding France's intentions, under the guidance of Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam decided to launch the strategic offensive known as the Winter-Spring Campaign 1953 to 1954. This campaign included numerous operations and strategic efforts to intensify guerrilla warfare in liberated areas, aiming to counter the maximum efforts of France and the United States. The Democratic Republic of Vietnam established firm control over large areas, including the Central Highlands, Region 5, the provinces of Cao Bac Lang, and various regions in the Red River Delta. With support from the United States, by 1954, 73% of France's war expenditures in Indochina were funded by the U.S. At this time, American advisors were present at all levels of the French expeditionary forces, able to inspect operations without needing approval from the French High Command. France's heavy reliance on the U.S. led General Henry Navarre to lament in his memoirs, "Our position has become that of a mere hired hand for America." The war entering its 8th year demonstrated that France's only remaining option was to seek an honorable exit if it didn't want to hand over Indochina to the United States. Vietnamese leaders in the Viet Minh assessed that direct American intervention in the Indochina War was only a matter of time. They also predicted that if the situation in Korea stabilized, the U.S. would focus its efforts on countering communism in Indochina. Before the dry season of 1953 to 1954, in terms of manpower, France had a significant numerical advantage. The total French force numbered 445,000 personnel, including 146,000 European and African troops, 33%, and 299,000 Vietnamese troops, 67%. In contrast, Vietnam's total force was only 252,000 personnel. Despite France's numerical and technical superiority, the guerrilla tactics applied rigorously by the Vietnamese people in the war of attrition dispersed French forces across multiple battlefields. France couldn't concentrate its numerical advantage in a decisive battle, nor did it have sufficient strength to launch a major offensive against the main Viet Minh forces in the north. If the entire northernmost region of Indochina falls under Viet Minh control, it would pose a significant risk to the war effort. It would have severe political repercussions, as France would appear powerless in defending its allied nations. Large-scale programs were launched to protect the northwestern Vietnam and upper Laos regions. General Navarre deployed paratroopers to reinforce Dien Bien Phu. He transformed Dien Bien Phu into a strong fortress where forces could concentrate to withstand the Viet Minh's main attacks. This was intended to crush the Viet Minh's main forces. General Cogny emphasized that Dien Bien Phu was an ideal military base, a key to Upper Laos. It nestled in a rugged valley in northwest Vietnam, 300 kilometers from Hanoi. Its difficult mountainous terrain posed significant challenges for Vietnam in transporting weapons and supplies. Initially not part of the plan, Dien Bien Phu became the centerpiece of General Navarre's strategy. Towards the People's Army of Vietnam, after establishing communications along the border with China, they received invaluable military assistance from the Soviet Union and China. Since then, the PAV has become much stronger and more mature compared to before 1950, totaling over 40,000 troops commanded by General Vo Nguyen Giap. Initially planning for swift victories, but upon understanding the specific situation of the French, realizing that victory was not guaranteed, General Giap shifted to the strategy of attacking firmly, advancing securely. Dien Bien Phu was the largest-scale campaign of the Vietnamese army and people during the resistance against French colonialism, 1945 to 1954. In this campaign, logistical work had to ensure the largest number of troops and the largest volume of materials under very difficult and harsh conditions. To excellently complete each battle and the entire campaign, the issue of ensuring the supply of food and ammunition is an extremely important factor, no less important than tactical issues, but with the spirit of unity of the entire nation. The Vietnamese military and people transported a huge amount of weapons, equipment, and food more than 300 kilometers to Dien Bien Phu, using bicycles and carrying on their backs. The Dien Bien Phu campaign lasted for 55 days and nights, divided into 3 phases. Phase 1, from March 13th to March 17th, 1954, the Vietnamese forces decisively destroyed the Him Lam and CLP strongholds, breached the Bien Ko stronghold, broke through the northern gateway of the Dien Bien Phu complex, eliminated and captured over 2,000 enemy troops, destroyed 25 aircraft, annihilated 1 battalion, and threatened the Meng Than airfield. Colonel Pirot, the French artillery commander at Dien Bien Phu, feeling helpless against the Vietnamese artillery, committed suicide with a grenade. Phase 2, from March 30th to April 30th, 1954, Vietnamese forces simultaneously attacked the eastern strongholds of the central sector, tightening the encirclement, cutting off and controlling the Meng Than airfield, limiting French reinforcements to the stronghold. This was the most prolonged, intense, and decisive phase of the battle, where Vietnam and France fought bitterly for every inch of land and every strategic trench. Particularly at Hill C1, Vietnamese and French forces wrestled for 20 days, and at Hill A1 for 30 days. After the second attack phase, The central sector of Dien Bien Phu fell within range of Vietnamese gunfire, leaving the French in a passive and demoralized state. Phase 3. From May 1st to May 7th, 1954, Vietnamese forces conclusively captured the eastern hills and launched a final offensive to eliminate remaining positions, capturing General de Castries and concluding the campaign. After 55 days and nights of courageous, strategic, and creative fighting, the Vietnamese army and people completely dismantled the Dien Bien Phu stronghold, eliminating and capturing 16,200 enemies, shooting down 62 planes, and capturing 64 vehicles along with all of France's weapons, ammunition, and military equipment. The victory of the Vietnamese people in the Dien Bien Phu campaign was one of the decisive strategic battles that contributed to bankrupting the Nava Plan and shattering the invasion ambitions of French colonialists. This led to the success of the anti-French resistance. This victory decisively shattered the colonial ambitions of the French in Indochina, forcing France to sign the Geneva Accords to end the war. The Geneva Accords, signed on July 20, 1954, suspended hostilities, restored peace in Indochina, abolished French rule, recognized the independence of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, and officially ended French colonial rule in Indochina. The 9-year resistance against French colonialism and British, American intervention completely ended the imperialist aggression of French colonialists in Vietnam and countries on the Indochinese peninsula. It safeguarded and developed the achievements of the August Revolution of 1945, opening a new revolutionary phase towards socialist revolution in North Vietnam, struggling for the liberation and reunification of the homeland, leading Vietnam towards socialism. The scene of the victorious army after the Dien Bien Phu campaign marched to Hanoi in the joyful welcome of all the people. The soldiers were affectionately called Uncle Ho's soldiers. The Victory Festival of Vietnam in general and the whole of Indochina in particular. Pride and patriotism were affirmed and multiplied many times to prepare for the next challenge, a long-term resistance war against the US and its allies. We will wait for the next video. That concludes today's video. How do you feel about Vietnam's resistance against France? Leave your comments and like the video if you enjoyed it. See you in the next videos. Thank you.